When the creature's head rose from the Indian Ocean on the morning of August 9th, 1538, Captain Tomás Velho counted 12 witnesses on the deck of the São Rafael. 12 experienced sailors who would later give sworn testimony before the Viceroy of Goa, describing the same impossible thing. A serpent, massive beyond comprehension. Its head alone stood 15 feet above the waterline, crowned with what appeared to be a crest of bone or cartilage that caught the dawn light. The neck, thick as the mainmast, extended from water dark with depth, and the body, what they could see of it, stretched back into the ocean for a length they could not measure. Some men swore 50 feet, others said 100. One claimed he'd seen coils breaking the surface 200 yards behind the creature's head, suggesting a body longer than any whale, longer than their ship, longer than anything that should exist in God's creation. The creature's eyes fixed on the São Rafael, not the casual glance of a whale or dolphin, focused, deliberate, intelligent. And in that moment, Velho knew with absolute certainty that they were being hunted. The serpent submerged, the ocean went still, and for 30 seconds, the only sound was the creak of timber and the prayers of terrified men. Then the Santo Antonio, sailing 200 yards to starboard, exploded upward. The creature had struck from below with such force that the 300-ton carrack lifted partially out of the water. Wood splintered, the mainmast snapped, men were thrown from the deck into the sea, and wrapped around the ship's hull, coiling with muscular precision, was the serpent's body, scaled, glistening, each scale the size of a dinner plate, overlapping like armor forged by some ancient, terrible intelligence. The Santo Antonio had survived 3 years of voyages between Lisbon and India, had weathered storms off the Cape of Good Hope that sent other ships to the bottom, had fought off Moorish pirates in the Red Sea, but in less than a minute, crushed by coils that tightened with relentless pressure, the ship's hull gave way. The sound of breaking timber carried across the water like cannon fire. And then the serpent pulled the Santo Antonio under, dragged it down into the dark water. 73 men, 6 months of trade goods, a ship that had cost the Portuguese crown a fortune, gone, swallowed by the ocean in the time it takes to say a Hail Mary. But to understand how 12 experienced Portuguese sailors came to swear before God and the Viceroy that a sea serpent destroyed their fleet, we need to go back 4 months. Back to Lisbon, where 5 ships prepared for the journey to India. Back to when Captain Tomás Velho believed the ocean held no mysteries a good carrack and an experienced crew couldn't handle. Back to before he learned that the maps were incomplete, that the depths held things no cartographer had charted, and that some creatures didn't just exist in sailors' tales. They hunted. Tomás Velho was 42 years old in the spring of 1538, and he'd spent 26 of those years at sea. He'd made his first voyage to India in 1520 as a junior officer aboard the São Gabriel, learning navigation and seamanship under captains who'd sailed with Vasco da Gama himself. By 1530, he'd earned his own command. By 1535, he'd completed 3 successful round-trip voyages between Lisbon and Goa, the dangerous, profitable route that had made Portugal the wealthiest maritime power in Europe. Velho was not a superstitious man. He'd seen too much of the ocean's real dangers, storms, disease, piracy, navigational error, to waste time fearing imaginary monsters. When sailors spoke of sea serpents and mermaids, he dismissed such talk as the fantasies of bored, frightened men looking for explanations for things they didn't understand. A whale breaching in fog became a serpent. A manatee glimpsed at dusk became a mermaid. The ocean was mysterious enough, without inventing creatures to populate it. His ship, the São Rafael, was a Portuguese carrack of exceptional quality. 120 feet from bow to stern, 4-masted, capable of carrying 300 tons of cargo and a crew of 80. The ship had been built in the royal dockyards at Lisbon with timber from Portuguese forests, fitted with the finest canvas sails and Portuguese-forged iron anchors. She was strong, fast for a ship of her size, and had proven herself reliable on 2 previous voyages to India under Velho's command. For the 1538 voyage, the Portuguese crown had assembled a fleet of 5 ships. The São Rafael would serve as the fleet's flagship, with Velho commanding the entire expedition. The other 4 vessels were the Santo Antonio, captained by Miguel Pereira, a veteran of 6 India voyages, the Nossa Senhora de Conceição under Captain João Rodrigues, younger but competent, the São Miguel, commanded by Diogo Soares, known for his exceptional navigation skills, and the Santa Clara, a smaller caravels, captained by Francisco Mendes, serving as a fast scout and message ship. In total, the fleet carried 320 men. Sailors, soldiers, merchants, 2 Jesuit priests traveling to establish a mission in Goa, a cartographer named Antonio Fernandes tasked with updating charts of the African coast, and the usual mix of adventurers, criminals fleeing Portuguese justice, and younger sons of noble families seeking fortune in the Indies. The cargo was typical for India-bound ships: Portuguese wine, olive oil, wool cloth, weapons, tools, and most importantly, silver coins to purchase the spices, silk, and gems that made these voyages profitable. If the fleet returned successfully, the Crown and private investors would see returns of 300% or more. If the fleet was lost, as many were, the financial and human cost would be devastating. The fleet departed Lisbon on April 14, 1538, blessed by the Archbishop and cheered by crowds gathered at the docks. The voyage to India typically took 6 to 8 months, depending on weather and winds. The route was well established by 1538, south along the African coast, rounding the Cape of Good Hope, then northeast across the Indian Ocean to Goa. It was a route Velho had sailed successfully multiple times. He knew its dangers: the doldrums near the equator where ships could sit becalmed for weeks, the violent storms off the Cape, the risk of scurvy on the long ocean crossings, the possibility of attack by Ottoman or Moorish ships in the Arabian Sea. These were known, manageable risks. Dangerous, yes, but understood. What Velho didn't know, what no amount of experience or preparation could have taught him, was that the route passed through waters claimed by something far older than Portuguese maritime tradition. Something that had hunted these oceans for longer than humans had sailed them. Something that viewed ships not as vessels of exploration and trade, but as intruders in its territory. The first month of the voyage was uneventful. The fleet made good time down the African coast, stopping briefly at Madeira and the Cape Verde Islands for fresh water and supplies. The ships stayed in formation, signaling with flags during the day and lanterns at night. The weather was favorable. The crews were healthy. Everything proceeded exactly as Velho's experience predicted. By late May, they'd reached the waters off the West African coast, near what modern charts would call the Gulf of Guinea. The weather remained good, but the mood among the crews began to shift. Sailors became nervous in ways Velho couldn't quite identify. Not the normal anxiety of men far from home, but something else: a watchfulness, an unease. When Velho asked his officers if they'd noticed the change, his first mate, a grizzled sailor named Paulo Costa, said something that stuck with him. "The men say the water feels wrong here, Captain. Too still, too quiet, like something's watching from below." Velho dismissed it as superstition, but he noticed it too. The ocean in this region was unusually calm. No dolphins playing in the bow wake. No seabirds, despite being relatively close to the African coast. No schools of fish breaking the surface. Just empty water, deep blue, utterly still. It was the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, but the skies remained clear. And deep below the 5 Portuguese ships, something ancient and massive stirred in the darkness, aware of the strange wooden shapes moving across the surface of its hunting grounds. The first concrete sign that something was wrong came on June 3, 1538, southeast of the Cape of Good Hope. The Santa Clara, the fleet's smallest and fastest ship, had ranged ahead of the main formation, scouting for weather or hazards. She maintained visual contact, never more than a few miles ahead. But on the morning of June 3rd, when the sun burned away the fog, the Santa Clara was gone. Captain Velho ordered signal flags raised. No one had seen the caravel. The Santa Clara had simply vanished during the night, despite calm seas and clear weather. There had been no distress signals, no sounds of combat. She was there at sunset. By sunrise, she was gone. Velho ordered the fleet to search the area. For 6 hours, the 4 remaining ships crisscrossed the waters where she should have been. They found nothing. No wreckage, no bodies, no debris, just empty ocean. Antonio Fernandez, the fleet's cartographer, noted the location. The disappearance made no sense. Ships didn't vanish in good weather. Hull damage would leave wreckage. Pirates would have been heard. The only explanation was that something had taken the ship down quickly, completely, and silently. But what could do that to a seaworthy vessel? Velho decided to continue south, ordering the remaining ships into a close formation. No more scouts. Whatever took the Santa Clara would now have to face the combined firepower of 4 ships. The crews were shaken. Sailors are superstitious, and the unexplained loss fed their fears. Velho overheard men whispering about sea monsters and cursed waters. He ordered the ship's priest, Father Sebastião, to lead prayers, but even the priest seemed uneasy. Asked privately about sea serpents, he was evasive. "The ocean is God's creation, Captain. The Book of Job speaks of Leviathan. Perhaps such things exist to test our faith." It wasn't the reassurance Velho hoped for. 3 days later, the fleet encountered physical evidence. The São Miguel reported a strange object floating ahead. It was a mass of torn flesh, recognizable as part of a large whale. The way the flesh was sheared away suggested something other than natural death. The whale had been bitten. Enormous semicircular wounds marked the carcass, suggesting a mouth at least 8 feet wide. The tooth marks indicated teeth longer than a man's hand. Fernandez sketched the wounds and later concluded no known shark could have made them. Everything was wrong. As the fleet sailed past the carrion, several sailors reported a long, sinuous shape diving deep as they approached. No one got a clear look, just an impression of something massive submerging. Captain Pereira of the Santo Antonio signaled, "Should we investigate?" Velho signaled back, "Maintain course." They wanted no part of whatever killed that whale. That night, Velho was awakened by shouting. In the moonlight, a dark, serpentine shape was pacing the ship just beneath the surface, keeping perfect pace. Velho ordered lanterns to the rail. In their flickering light, they saw a body as thick as a barrel, covered in scales with an oily sheen. The visible portion was at least 40 feet long, and both ends disappeared into darkness. For 10 minutes, the creature swam alongside, as if evaluating them. Then, with a powerful flex, it dove, vanishing into the black depths. First Mate Paulo Costa made the sign of the cross. "Serpent," he whispered. "God save us, Captain." Velho had wanted to dismiss it, but he'd seen it clearly. No whale moved like that. No shark had that shape or size. The sailors' superstitions suddenly felt less imaginary. Over the next week, as the fleet rounded the Cape and entered the Indian Ocean, sightings increased. Every night, at least one ship reported seeing the creature, always following, always watching. The men began calling it a serpent, the Serpent. Antonio Fernandez interviewed sailors from previous India voyages. 3 men independently described seeing massive serpentine shapes in these same waters. One claimed a creature had risen from beneath and pulled a small boat under, crew and all. His account, once dismissed as fantasy, now seemed chillingly plausible. On June 19th, they met a returning merchant ship, the Nossa Senhora de Belém. When Velho mentioned the Serpent, its captain, an old sailor named Afonso Cabral, went pale. "You've seen it too?" Cabral asked. "The great serpent of the deep. You know of it?" "Every sailor on this passage knows," Cabral said quietly. "We don't speak of it in port, but out here it hunts. I lost a ship to it 15 years ago. The creature rose beneath us at dawn and pulled it down. I survived because I was in the crow's nest. 43 men died. When I told the viceroy, he called me a liar." Velho felt his blood chill. "What is it? What does it want?" Cabral shook his head. "Something old. It's hunting, Captain. These are its waters, my advice. Stay in formation, keep fires burning, make noise, show strength. Sometimes it loses interest. Sometimes," he paused, "it attacks. If it does, God help you. Nothing else can." The two fleets parted. As the Nossa Senhora de Belém disappeared toward home, Velho envied them. He was heading deeper in. That night, the Serpent surfaced closer than ever, less than 50 yards from the São Rafael. In the moonlight, Velho saw its head clearly for the first time. Massive, reptilian, and ancient. Its enormous, dark eyes reflected the ship's lanterns with an intelligence that made his skin crawl. The creature was deciding, evaluating, and Velho knew with a sailor's certainty that the Serpent was no longer just following them. It was preparing to attack. Captain Velho called a council of his remaining captains on the morning of June 21st. The four ships hove to in calm seas, and the captains rowed to the São Rafael in small boats. Miguel Pereira of the Santo Antonio, João Rodrigues of the Nossa Senhora de Conceição, and Diogo Soares of the São Miguel climbed aboard, their faces grim. They gathered in Velho's cabin, maps spread on the table, and for the first time since departing Lisbon, they spoke honestly about what they faced. "We all saw it last night," Velho began. "We all know what's following us. The question is, what do we do?" "Turn back," Rodrigues said immediately. He was the youngest captain, only 31, and his nerve was fraying. "This creature has already taken the Santa Clara. It's hunting us. Every night it gets closer. We should turn around, return to Portuguese waters, report to the Crown that these shipping lanes are compromised." "And tell them what?" Pereira countered. "That we abandoned a profitable voyage because we saw a big fish. We'll be laughed out of Lisbon, stripped of our commands. This fleet represents a massive investment. We can't just abandon it without trying every option first." Diogo Soares, the fleet's best navigator, spoke up. "How far are we from Goa?" Antonio Fernandes consulted his charts. "At current speed, approximately 6 weeks. We're less than halfway through the Indian Ocean crossing." "6 weeks is too long," Soares said. "Whatever that creature is, it's getting bolder. It won't wait 6 weeks to strike. If we continue on course, it'll attack within days. We need to change our approach." "How?" Velho asked. "We can't outrun it. We've tried. It matches our speed effortlessly. We can't fight it. We have cannon, but how do you aim at something that attacks from below? We can't hide. There's no land for thousands of miles." The cabin fell silent. The problem was simple and unsolvable. They were being hunted by something massive, intelligent, and perfectly adapted to its environment. Ships were not. Father Sebastião, who'd been invited to the council, spoke quietly. "Perhaps we're thinking about this wrong. We're treating it like an enemy to defeat. But what if it's simply a creature defending its territory? What if it would leave us alone if we showed we're not a threat?" "How do we do that?" Rodrigues asked skeptically. "Offerings," the priest suggested. "Sailors have made offerings to the sea for thousands of years. Food, wine. Perhaps if we show respect, demonstrate we mean no harm, the creature will let us pass." Pereira scoffed. "You want us to feed a sea monster, make it think we're a convenient food source?" "I want us to survive," Father Sebastião replied calmly. "And if that requires acknowledging that God's creation includes creatures we don't understand, creatures that command these waters, then yes. I suggest we show respect rather than defiance." Velho considered the proposal. It went against his instincts. He was a ship's captain, not a supplicant, but desperate situations called for creative solutions. "We'll try it," he decided. "Tonight we make an offering, salted pork, wine, whatever we can spare. We throw it overboard and see if the creature responds. If it accepts and leaves us alone, we continue to India. If not," he paused, "then we prepare for battle and pray our cannons can hurt it." The captains agreed, though none looked confident. They returned to their ships and spread the word among the crews. That evening, as the sun set over the Indian Ocean, all 4 ships gathered their offerings. Barrels of salted meat, jugs of wine, dried fruit, even some of the trade silver. The men lined the rails and at a signal from Velho threw everything overboard. The offerings floated on the calm water, spreading around the ships. The fleet waited, watching, praying. For an hour, nothing happened. The sun disappeared, stars emerged, the ocean remained still. Then, just after full darkness, the water beside the São Rafael began to roil. The Serpent surfaced. Its head rose above the waterline, towering over the ship's rail. In the lantern light, Velho saw every terrible detail. The scales, each one perfectly formed, overlapping in patterns that suggested both armor and flexibility. The crest of bone and cartilage running from its skull down the visible neck. The eyes, massive and dark, with vertical slits like a reptile, but something else too. Something that spoke of intelligence. The creature's mouth opened slightly. Row upon row of teeth, each one curved and serrated, designed for gripping and tearing. The size of the head suggested the mouth could easily engulf a man, possibly several men. The serpent regarded the floating offerings. Its head moved with precise, almost bird-like motions, examining the barrels and jugs. Then, with shocking delicacy, it plucked one of the meat barrels from the water, crushing it between jaws that could have torn a ship's mast in half. Swallowed. Considered. For a moment, Velho dared to hope. The creature had accepted the offering. Perhaps it would be satisfied. Perhaps they could coexist. Then the serpent's eyes fixed on the São Rafael, on Velho himself, standing at the rail. And in that gaze, Velho saw something that shattered his hope. Recognition, calculation, decision. This wasn't a mindless beast accepting tribute. This was an intelligent predator who just learned that ships contained food. The offering hadn't placated it. It had marked them as prey. The serpent submerged, slowly, deliberately, not fleeing, simply returning to its preferred hunting depth. And as it descended, its body passed the ship. The crew watched in horror as coil after coil slipped beneath the surface. 50 feet, 100 feet, more. The creature seemed endless. When it finally disappeared, Paulo Costa spoke what everyone was thinking. We've made it worse. It knows we're food now. It won't leave us alone. It'll hunt us until it's fed. Velho couldn't disagree. The offering had been a mistake, a fatal miscalculation. They'd shown weakness, confirmed they were prey. He looked at his officers. Battle stations, every night from now on. Cannon loaded with chain shot. Crew armed with spears and axes. If it attacks, we hurt it badly enough that it decides we're not worth the effort. It's our only chance. The order spread through the fleet. Men who'd been sailors became soldiers. The ships transformed into floating fortresses. Watches were doubled. Weapons distributed. Every man knew his station for when the serpent struck. Not if, when. Because everyone understood now. The creature wasn't going to leave them alone. It had been following them for weeks, studying them, learning their patterns. It had already taken one ship, and it would take more. The only question was when it would strike next, and whether they could survive what was coming. The Serpent attacked at dawn on August 9th, 1538, in the deep waters of the central Indian Ocean. The fleet had spent the night in tight formation, every ship's crew at battle stations, watching the dark water for signs of movement. As the eastern sky lightened to grey, exhaustion was setting in. Men had been on high alert for 3 consecutive nights. Attention was wavering. The Serpent had been waiting for exactly that moment. It rose beneath the Santo Antonio like a living nightmare erupting from the abyss. The first impact lifted the 300-ton carrack partially out of the water, her keel shrieking as it flexed beyond design limits. Men on deck were thrown down. The mainmast, stressed beyond tolerance, cracked with a sound like cannon fire. On the São Rafael, 200 yards away, Velho watched in paralyzed horror as the creature's body emerged from the water, coiling around the Santo Antonio with terrible precision. The scales caught the dawn light, each one reflecting gold and green. The body was impossibly thick, muscled with power that made the ship's oak timbers look fragile as kindling. The Serpent's head rose above the Santo Antonio's masts, water streaming from its crest. The creature's eyes swept the damaged ship, calculating. Then with shocking speed it struck. The massive head descended, jaws opening wide and closed around the ship's stern castle. Wood splintered. Men screamed. When the serpent lifted its head again, it carried 2 sailors in its mouth, their screams cut short as the jaws crushed closed. "Fire!" Velho roared. "All cannon, fire now!" The São Rafael's gun crews, trained and ready, responded instantly. 8 cannon fired simultaneously, the broadside crashing out across the water. Most shots missed, the range and angle wrong for hitting a moving target. But 2 struck home. Chain shot, 2 iron balls connected by a length of chain, designed to shred sails and rigging, caught the serpent's neck. The impact tore away scales, cutting deep furrows in the thick flesh beneath. The creature's reaction was instantaneous. Its head whipped toward the São Rafael, eyes fixing on the source of pain. For the first time, the serpent vocalized, a sound like nothing Velho had ever heard. Not a roar, not a hiss, something deeper, resonating through the water and the ship's timbers, a sound of rage and challenge. Then it returned its attention to the Santo Antonio. The coils tightened. The ship's hull, built to withstand storms and heavy seas, began to fail under pressure. No ship was designed to resist. Planks popped, seams split, water rushed into the hold. Captain Miguel Pereira, visible on the Santo Antonio's tilted deck, was shouting orders. Men were trying to hack at the creature's coils with axes, the blades bouncing off scaled armor that might as well have been steel. Others were jumping overboard, choosing the ocean over being crushed or consumed. The Nossa Senhora de Conceição and São Miguel were maneuvering closer, their cannon crews scrambling to get firing angles that wouldn't hit the Santo Antonio. But the serpent and ship were too entangled. Any shot might kill their own men. Velho made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. "Signal the fleet," he ordered. "Do not engage, fall back. We can't save them." Paulo Costa stared at him. "Captain, those are our men." "And they're already dead," Velho shouted. "Look at that ship. She's going down. If we stay, we'll be next. Signal the fleet to retreat, now." The flags went up. On the Conceição and São Miguel, captains who were also watching their colleagues die made the same terrible calculation. Save 73 men and lose multiple ships, or sacrifice 73 and possibly save the rest. They chose survival. The 3 remaining ships turned away, catching wind, beginning to move. Behind them, the Santo Antonio's death throes continued. The hull was breaking apart now, sections of planking tearing away. The ship was no longer floating. It was being held above water only by the serpent's coils. Velho forced himself to watch, to bear witness, to remember. He saw Captain Pereira on the deck, still standing, still trying to save his men, even as the ship died around him. He saw sailors clinging to rigging as the masts toppled. He saw the creature's head descend again, jaws closing around the ship's midsection, teeth puncturing oak like paper. And then, with a final, violent constriction, the serpent pulled the Santo Antonio under. The ocean rushed in to fill the void, creating a whirlpool that pulled debris and swimming men down with it. For perhaps 10 seconds, the tip of the mainmast remained visible, jutting from the water at an angle. Then it too disappeared. 73 men, 6 months of trade goods, a ship worth more than most men would earn in a lifetime. Gone, swallowed by the ocean in less than 5 minutes. The serpent didn't pursue the fleeing ships. It remained at the site of the sinking, its head visible above the surface, watching them go, claiming its kill, establishing dominance. And Velho knew, watching that terrible head silhouetted against the rising sun, that they just learned something important and horrible. The creature could destroy them whenever it chose. It had the power, the speed, the intelligence. If they survived the journey to India, it wouldn't be because they'd defeated the serpent. It would be because the serpent allowed them to survive. They were in its ocean now, subject to its will, prey that existed only because the hunter chose not to strike. The 3 ships fled east, toward India, toward safety that seemed impossibly distant. Behind them, the serpent followed, patient, satisfied for now, but still hunting. Still hungry. and the ocean that stretched before them suddenly felt less like a highway to fortune and more like a vast, deep hunting ground where humans were no longer the dominant species. Where something older, something more powerful, ruled the depths and demanded tribute in blood and ships and the souls of men who dared cross its territory. The 3 remaining ships fled east for 2 days without stopping, sails pushed to their limits, every man watching the water behind them for the Serpent's return. 73 brothers, friends, and colleagues were gone. The Santo Antonio, a ship that had survived 3 years of voyages, crushed and dragged to the bottom like driftwood. On the evening of August 11th, Captain Velho finally ordered the fleet to heave to. They needed to assess damage, ration remaining supplies, and make a terrible decision: continue to India or attempt the return to Portugal. The captains gathered again aboard the São Rafael. This time, there was no debate about whether the creature existed. They'd all watched it destroy a 300-ton ship. The question was survival. Antonio Fernandes presented the mathematics. We're approximately 4 weeks from Goa if conditions remain favorable, 6 weeks back to Portuguese waters. Our water supplies are adequate for either journey. Food is tighter, especially with the Santa Clara and Santo Antonio gone. We lost their provisions. We'll need to ration carefully. And the creature? Captain Joe Rodriguez asked, his voice hollow. The young captain had aged years in 2 days. Does it matter which direction we sail if that thing is following us? Velho had been thinking about exactly that. It attacked the Santo Antonio specifically, not the whole fleet. It had opportunities to strike all of us simultaneously, but it chose one ship. That suggests it's hunting strategically, not just killing everything it encounters. You're saying it's intelligent, Diogo Soares said. I'm saying it's not mindless, Velho replied. It followed us for weeks before attacking. It studied us, learned our patterns. When it struck, it chose the ship that was slightly separated from formation, the most vulnerable target. Paulo Costa, who'd been silent, spoke up. So we stay tight together, make ourselves harder to kill. Maybe it decides we're not worth the effort. Or it's patient, Rodriguez countered, waiting for us to make another mistake, waiting for weather to scatter us or damage to separate us. We can't stay in perfect formation forever. Father Sebastião offered a different perspective. We continue to India. The creature lives in these deep waters. Perhaps as we approach land, as the ocean shallows, it won't follow. Perhaps coastal waters are beyond its range. It was logical. Large, deep-sea creatures typically avoided shallow water. If the Serpent was adapted to the ocean depths, it might not pursue them into the shipping lanes near Goa, where the water was less than a few hundred feet deep. Velho made the decision. We continue east. We increase speed as much as possible. We stay in tight formation. No ship strays more than 100 yards from T. The others, we maintain battle readiness at all times, and we pray Father Sebastião is right about shallow water. The order went out to the fleet. That night, the 3 ships sailed in a formation so tight their lanterns almost touched. Men slept at their posts. Weapons remained within arm's reach. The ocean around them was calm, but no one trusted the stillness anymore. They'd learned that beneath calm surfaces, monsters waited. The Serpent didn't attack that night, or the next. For 6 days, the fleet saw no sign of the creature. Some men began to hope it had given up, that the destruction of the Santo Antonio had satisfied its hunger or territorial instinct, that they might actually reach India alive. On August 17th, that hope died. The creature surfaced half a mile ahead of the fleet, not hiding, not attacking, just there. Floating at the surface, its body clearly visible in the afternoon sun. The head alone was the size of a ship's boat. The visible body extended at least 200 feet, coiled in massive loops that rose and fell with the ocean's gentle swell. It was waiting, blocking their path, daring them to approach. Velho ordered the fleet to stop. For 2 hours, ships and Serpent remained motionless. A standoff. The creature showed no sign of moving. The fleet couldn't advance without passing within striking distance. Finally, Diogo Soares signaled a suggestion: attempt to sail around it. Give the creature a wide berth, detour north, then resume eastward course. Velho agreed. The fleet turned north, maintaining maximum distance from the Serpent while still making eastward progress. The creature watched them adjust course. Then, with movements that demonstrated its perfect adaptation to the ocean, it submerged and repositioned. When it surfaced again, it was directly in their new path, still blocking them, still waiting. They tried going south. The Serpent repositioned again. It was herding them, controlling their movement, demonstrating that in this ocean it decided where ships could go. "It's playing with us," Paulo Costa said, his voice tight with fear and anger. "Like a cat with a mouse." "No," Antonio Fernandez said, studying the creature through his spyglass. "It's establishing dominance, showing us that it controls these waters. We sail where it allows us to sail." "Then what do we do?" Rodriguez asked. "We can't fight it. We can't run from it. We can't go around it." Velho made a decision born of desperation and calculation. "We sail through, straight line, full speed. We don't deviate, don't show fear, don't acknowledge it. We act like it's not there. Maybe if we show we're not challenging it, just passing through, it'll let us go." It was a gamble, but they were out of options. The fleet formed a line, the São Rafael leading, the Nossa Senhora de Conceição and São Miguel following close behind. They caught the wind and began moving directly toward where the Serpent floated. As they approached, every man on every ship watched the creature, watched for the first sign of attack, watched for the coils to tighten, the head to rise, the jaws to open. The distance closed. 500 yards, 400, 300. The Serpent's eyes tracked them, ancient, calculating, unreadable. 200 yards. The creature's body began to move, not attacking, submerging, diving deep, clearing the path. 100 yards. The Serpent was gone, just empty water where moments before it had blocked their passage. The São Rafael sailed over the spot where the creature had been. Nothing, just ocean. The other ships followed. For several minutes, the fleet held its breath, waiting for the attack from below, for the impact that would signal their destruction. But nothing came. The ocean remained calm. The ships sailed on. An hour passed. Then, too, the Serpent didn't reappear. "Did it leave?" Rodriguez signaled. Velho didn't answer. He didn't believe the creature had left. It was still there, somewhere below, shadowing them, invisible in the deep water, but there. The question was, why hadn't it attacked? Why block their path only to let them pass? What was it waiting for? He would get his answer soon enough. The Serpent struck for the second time on August 22nd, in waters Antonio Fernandez calculated were less than 3 weeks from Goa. This time it came at night. This time it came for all of them. The attack began with the São Miguel sailing at the rear of the formation. The ship simply stopped moving. Crew on the Nossa Senhora de Conceição noticed first. The São Miguel's lanterns were no longer keeping pace. Captain Rodriguez signaled to Velho. The trailing ship was falling behind. Velho ordered the fleet to heave to and wait for the São Miguel to catch up, but the ship remained dead in the water. No sails furled, no anchors dropped, just motionless, as if held by some invisible force. Then the screaming started. Even across 200 yards of water, the sounds carried clearly in the still. Night air, men shouting in terror, the crash of something massive striking the ship's hull, and underneath it all, that terrible sound the Serpent had made before, the deep, resonating vocalization that vibrated through water and wood and bone. "It's underneath them," Paulo Costa said. "It's got the ship from below." Velho grabbed his spyglass, but in the darkness he could see little. Just the São Miguel's lanterns swaying violently as something shook the entire ship. Shadows moving on deck, men running, fighting something. "We have to help them," Rodriguez signaled. Velho knew it was probably suicide, but these were his men, his fleet, his responsibility. Battle stations. "We're going in. load cannon with chain shot, prepare boarding parties with spears and axes. The São Rafael and Conceição turned toward the stricken ship, closing the distance as quickly as sail and wind allowed. As they approached, Velho finally saw what was happening. The Serpent had wrapped a portion of its body around the São Miguel's rudder and keel, holding the ship motionless. But it wasn't trying to crush this ship, it was climbing it. The creature's body extended up from the water, coiled around the mainmast, and the head was on deck, among the crew, hunting them. Men were fighting with desperate courage, stabbing at the creature with spears, hacking with axes. But the scaled armor deflected most blows, and the Serpent's head moved with terrifying speed, striking like a snake, jaws closing around sailors and pulling them overboard or crushing them on deck. Captain Diogo Soares was visible in the lamplight, standing at the helm, firing a musket directly into the creature's face. The shot hit, blood spraying black in the darkness. The Serpent's head whipped toward Soares. The jaws opened, closed, and Soares was gone. "Fire!" Velho screamed. The São Rafael's starboard cannon fired in sequence, the shots arcing across the water. Most missed, the angle impossible, but two struck the Serpent's body where it coiled around the mast. The impact tore away scales, gouged deep wounds. The creature's reaction was immediate. It released the São Miguel and turned toward this new source of pain. The massive head rose above the São Rafael's deck, easily 15 feet above the rail. In the lantern light, Velho saw every detail. The vertical slit pupils dilated wide in the darkness. The rows of serrated teeth, each one longer than a man's forearm. The intelligence in those eyes, the calculation, the rage. The creature dove, not fleeing, repositioning, and Velho realized what was about to happen a second before it did. Brace for impact. The Serpent struck the São Rafael from below, ramming the hull with force that lifted the bow partially out of the water. The entire ship shuddered. Men were thrown down, rigging snapped, and through the hull came the sound of wood beginning to crack. The creature was using the tactics that had killed the Santo Antonio. Ram from below, damage the hull, then coil and crush. But Velho had learned from watching the first attack. Cut the anchors, dump all weight overboard, cargo, cannon, everything, make us lighter. The crew responded with desperate speed. Cannon were pushed to the rail and levered overboard. Barrels of supplies were rolled to openings and dumped. Anything heavy, anything that could be spared, went into the ocean. The São Rafael rose higher in the water, drawing less depth, becoming harder for the creature to grip from below. The Serpent circled, reassessing. It dove deep, disappearing. The São Rafael and Conceição waited, crews armed and ready, watching the water. For 5 minutes, nothing. Just the disabled São Miguel drifting nearby, her crew decimated, but some survivors visible on deck. Just the two remaining ships, waiting for the next attack. Then Paulo Costa pointed. There, moving away. The Serpent's wake was visible in the moonlight, a disturbance on the ocean's surface heading east. The creature was leaving, not defeated, they hadn't hurt it enough for that, but perhaps frustrated. Perhaps deciding these particular ships were too difficult, the prey too defensive, the cost too high. It disappeared into the darkness, and slowly, carefully, the survivors began to believe it might actually be gone. The São Miguel was badly damaged but still afloat. Of her crew of 80, 37 were dead or missing, taken by the Serpent during the attack. Captain Soares was among the dead. The ship's rudder was destroyed, making steering impossible. The mainmast was cracked and unstable. Velho made the brutal calculation. The São Miguel couldn't make it to India. She could barely stay afloat. But they couldn't abandon her crew. They transferred the survivors to the São Rafael and Conceição, distributed supplies, then made the hardest decision of the voyage. They set the São Miguel on fire and let her burn down to the waterline. Better a controlled destruction than leaving her drifting as a hazard tea. Oh, other ships, better to give her a warrior's end than let her rot. 2 ships remained, the São Rafael and Nossa Senhora de Conceição. 147 survivors from the original fleet of 320 men, and still weeks from safety. They sailed east through August and into September. Every night, watchers scanned the water for signs of the Serpent, but it didn't return. Perhaps it had moved to different hunting grounds. Perhaps it had decided the Portuguese ships were too dangerous to be worth pursuing. Or perhaps it was simply patient, waiting for weather or damage to weaken them before striking again. The fleet would never know, because on September 19th, 1538, they sighted land. The western coast of India, the shipping lanes near Goa where Portuguese vessels sailed regularly and the water was too shallow for deep ocean creatures. The Serpent, if it was still following, did not pursue them into coastal waters. The two battered ships sailed into Goa harbor on September 23rd, 3 months after losing the Santa Clara, 6 weeks after the destruction of the Santo Antonio, and a month after the São Miguel's final battle. The Viceroy of Goa, Dom Garcia de Noronha, received Captain Velho's report with visible skepticism. A sea serpent, massive enough to destroy ships, intelligent enough to hunt strategically. It sounded like fantasy, like an elaborate excuse for catastrophic losses. But Velho had witnesses, 147 men from 3 different ships, all telling consistent accounts. He had Antonio Fernandez' detailed logs and sketches. He had the testimony of 2 ship captains and a priest, and he had no reason to lie. The financial losses fell on the Portuguese crown and investors, not on Velho personally. The Viceroy conducted formal interviews, separately questioning officers and crew, looking for inconsistencies that would reveal a fabricated story. But the accounts matched, the details aligned, and men who'd never met before gave identical descriptions of the creature. Most compelling was the testimony of survivors from the São Miguel's final battle. They'd fought the creature on deck, touched its scales, seen its intelligence up close. One sailor showed scars where the serpent's teeth had grazed him, parallel wounds that matched no known shark or whale. Dom Garcia couldn't dismiss it entirely, but he also couldn't officially acknowledge it without looking foolish to the Portuguese crown. His solution was bureaucratic. He accepted Velho's report, classified the ship losses as destroyed by unknown marine hazard, and recommended future fleets take additional precautions in the central Indian Ocean. He quietly increased escort sizes and ordered ships to avoid sailing alone in deep water. But he also did something else. He sent a confidential letter to King João III in Lisbon, describing Velho's account and recommending the crown consider whether the India route was becoming too dangerous. The letter included Antonio Fernandez sketches of the creature and detailed logs of the attacks. The king's response came 6 months later. The India trade was too profitable to abandon. Ships would continue sailing, but the crown acknowledged that certain waters appeared more hazardous than others. Fleets should travel in larger groups, avoid unnecessary delays in deep ocean, and most tellingly, the crown authorized payment of death benefits to the families of lost sailors without the usual bureaucratic challenges, tacit acknowledgement that something unusual had killed those men. Velho made one more voyage to India in 1540, commanding a fleet of 7 ships that stayed in tight formation throughout the journey. They saw no sign of the serpent. Whether it had moved to different waters, whether it had died, or whether it simply chose not to attack a larger, more defensive fleet, Velho never knew. He retired in 1542, bought a small estate near Lisbon, and spent his remaining years writing a detailed account of the 1538 voyage. The manuscript, titled Relação de Serpent do Mar Profundo, Account of the Serpent of the Deep Sea, included everything: the stalking, the attacks, the deaths of good men, the terror of facing something that shouldn't exist. He died in 1551. His manuscript was filed in the Royal Archives, where it gathered dust for centuries, occasionally read by researchers, but generally dismissed as the fanciful tale of an old sailor embellishing his memories. Until modern researchers began comparing it to other accounts, other sightings, other encounters with something massive that hunted the deep oceans and left only questions in its wake. Velho's manuscript wasn't unique. As researchers digitized Portuguese maritime archives, they discovered a pattern. Between 1500 and 1650, at least 47 Portuguese ships were lost in the Indian Ocean to unknown marine hazards. Among varied reports, 11 specifically described serpentine creatures with characteristics matching Velho's. In 1545, just 7 years after Velho's encounter, Captain Rodrigo Mendes reported fighting off a great serpent south of Madagascar. His crew drove it away with cannon fire, and his description of its scaled body and intelligent hunting matched Velho's account almost exactly. In 1591, a Dutch fleet encountered a sea dragon in the same region. The Dutch captain, Willem van der Hagen, reported that the creature attempted to coil around his ship's hull and seemed to learn from the assault, changing tactics to avoid cannon fire. The accounts continued sporadically through the 1600s, then decreased sharply in the 1700s. It's speculated the creature or creatures died, moved, or simply learned to avoid the increasingly well-armed ships. By the 1800s, as the age of sail ended, reports became rare enough to be dismissed as legend. The scientific worldview had no room for sea serpents. But the reports never completely stopped. In 1848, officers of the HMS Daedalus gave sworn testimony of a massive serpentine creature in the South Atlantic. In 1906, a British steamer in the Indian Ocean was paced for 3 days by a similar creature that never attacked. And in 1964, a blurry photograph from a French research vessel showed a large, serpentine shape at a depth of 800 feet off Madagascar. Modern cryptozoologists have compiled these accounts, noting striking consistencies: a large serpentine body, intelligent behavior, and strategic attacks. Skeptics argue these are misidentifications of known animals like oarfish or giant squids, or debris misinterpreted by frightened sailors. However, many witnesses were experienced naval officers and trained observers. Velho had spent 26 years at sea, and the HMS Daedalus officers were Royal Navy professionals with much to lose by reporting something so fantastical. Furthermore, details like strategic hunting, the way the creature in Velho's account blocked and herded the fleet, cannot be easily explained by misidentification. This is not the behavior of a mindless animal. In 2019, a paper by marine biologists examined these historical reports. While acknowledging most were likely misidentifications, they noted that with less than 20% of the seafloor mapped, the possibility of large, unknown marine animals isn't scientifically impossible. They specifically cited Velho's 1538 account as one of the most credible due to its multiple witnesses and descriptions of specific behaviors not found in typical folklore. The paper concluded, while we cannot confirm the existence of the creature Velho described, we also cannot definitively rule it out. If a species of large marine reptile adapted to deep water and survived the extinction events, it could potentially remain undiscovered. It's not proof, but it's acknowledgement that the question remains open. In 2023, a cargo ship crossing the Indian Ocean reported an anomalous sonar contact, a large biological object with a serpentine movement pattern at 1,000-foot depth. It was tracked for 17 minutes before it dove and disappeared. Maritime authorities investigated but found no explanation. This report joined thousands of others in naval and cryptozoological databases, unexplained sonar contacts, and brief sightings, suggesting something unknown lives in the deep. Captain Tomás Velho died believing the creature that destroyed his fleet was real. He spent years defending his account against ridicule and died without official validation. But his manuscript survives, a first-hand account of something science still hasn't explained. And so the question remains. Somewhere in the unexplored, 20,000-foot deep trenches of the Indian Ocean, does something ancient still swim? Or did Velho encounter the last of its kind? We may never know. The ocean keeps its secrets, and if the creature exists, it has learned to stay hidden in the darkness where humans cannot reach. Perhaps it's for the best. Velho's fleet learned that in the ocean, we are visitors, not rulers. They learned that some creatures tolerate our presence only until we become a nuisance, and then teach us with terrible efficiency that the waters belong to them. Today, thousands of ships cross the Indian Ocean. Most see nothing, but occasional reports of strange shapes or sonar contacts are added to a growing database, evidence that Velho might have been right. That something still watches from the deep places, remembering when the ocean was theirs alone. If the serpent or its descendants still exist, perhaps we should be grateful they have learned to avoid us. It is a reminder that we don't rule the ocean. We are merely permitted to cross it. Captain Velho saw this in the serpent's intelligent eyes and spent his life warning others to respect what lives in the deep. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Some depths are better left unexplored. And some creatures should remain in the darkness where they belong.